Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're excited that you're here. My name is Laine Bradshaw. I am the Vice President of Classroom Solutions at Pearson and the founder of Navvy Education. And today we're in our 30 minutes together, we're going to give you an overview of Navvy. It'll be a little bit quicker, but if you want to follow up with us after the meeting, we're more than happy to spend some more time with you. Today, we just wanted to give you an overview and let you see the platform. So when we built Navvy 5.5 years ago, we were working with school districts who are in a situation that a lot of you are probably in. We have standards, and we have a goal for students to learn those standards. And as soon as we start the school year, then we get to a place where we've taught material for a standard or a small set of standards, and we're ready to know whether the students understand the standard or not. And so before we built Navvy, there was no system built to fulfill the need of identifying, has the student learned the standard or do they still need help on the standard? And so we built Navvy to inform teaching and guide learning by accurately identifying, has the learning taken place or does the student still need more support? And so our whole goal is to provide trustworthy learning evidence and a healthy assessment system. So I want to start with this slide. That the diagram here is an oversimplified version of the formative assessment process. And so one of the fundamental premises that we built Navvy on is that personalized learning is a powerful tool for successful learning. And so if we can identify what students know and what they don't know and tailor support for those students to what they don't know, then we will accelerate their learning, help them be more successful in their learning. And so let's think about this process. First, we're going to start off planning some instruction, and we're going to provide that primary instruction in the classroom. We're going to teach a standard or small set of standards, and we get to that point that I was talking about where we want to check understanding of that standard or the set of concepts that we've taught. We're going to look at those results to let us know, has the student learned the standard or not? And then we'll use that to plan additional instructional support or to plan personalized learning to form our meaningful groups for differentiated instruction. And then we get to this point again where we've provided that additional instructional support, and we again want to check understanding and say, okay, well, now does the student understand the standard? And so we'll then use those results, use them to plan again, teach again, and the cycle continues until the child learns what the standard requires. And so in this process, this check understanding piece is our assessment piece. And so with respect to that, assessment is a key part of this personalized learning cycle or a key part of the formative assessment process. But we built Navvy because when you get to this check understanding phase, all of this cycle is happening in the classroom, day-to-day, week-to-week instruction. And if you stop and check understanding and your results aren't accurate, then you're going to actually misguide, or you could misguide your next steps or all of the energy and effort and time that you're putting into personalized learning. So if you kind of miss in either direction, there's a downside. So if we say a child doesn't need help on the standard and they really do still need help on the standard, then we leave this learning gap for them. If we say a child does need help on the standard and they don't, then we're essentially wasting everybody's time. So the other pieces that in this check understanding phase, we know that we've got to get this data in, you guys, if you're teachers, in your hands. If you're administrators, we've got to get it in teachers' hands in a timely way. They can't act on data they don't have. And that information has to be specific, which in classroom assessments, usually assessments are after measuring something very specific, like a standard or a specific concept or skill that's been taught. And so we need all three of these features to happen in that check understanding phase. And so before we built Navvy, this was kind of what the field of assessments looked like. So we have summative assessments, interim assessment, summative at the end of the year, interim would happen 3 times a year, and then classroom assessments that are happen day to day, week to week, that classroom teachers are doing. And so my background is a psychometrician. I'm a professor at the University of Georgia in quantitative methodology. And so we build interim assessments and summative assessments with all of the psychometric validity and reliability and best practices of building an assessment to make sure they have that accuracy and reliability for those overall scores like 6th grade math, or even for domain scores like geometry and algebra or reading informational, reading literary. But we psychometricians don't build classroom assessments. And so the landscape, we have interim and summatives that are built really carefully, but they aren't timely and they don't provide specific data. They provide that course domain data or the course grade level data. And so we built Navvy to add accuracy and reliability in the classroom assessment space. And so our overall goal is to give teachers timely data that you can trust at a grain size that you can use. And so I'm going to show you one more slide, and I'm just going to dive into the platform. So if we look at this slide, it's showing you 5 of the main features of Navvy. First of all, it's standards aligned. It's aligned to the English and math, science, and social studies standards. And the way we've built the assessments is we have 6 to 8 questions per assessment, and each assessment is measuring an individual standard. So it's a modular system that you can use flexibly to fit your scope and sequence. The second bullet here speaks to that pre-built nature. So we've designed all of the assessments, crafted them for you so that they can be short, but still give that reliable or trustworthy diagnosis of the student needs help on the standard, or they're good to go on the standard, or they've reached competency at the standard. And then teachers can assign those standards in any combination they choose. You could give them one at a time, or you could give them in specific combinations that correspond to the set of lessons that you just taught. Within the platform, students have a dashboard, teachers have a dashboard, school admin, district admin. And on the student dashboard, we're really attending to not just the type of information we're giving back to students, but how we're communicating that information to students to foster a healthy learning mindset. So the platform is set up to be consistent with building a growth learning mindset. And then we have the data presented in different ways. All of the results were given in real time. And so your dashboards will present individual student data, aggregate student data at the class level, and then for administrators across the school or even district level. We also break down the reports even more fine-grained than a standard. We'll give you information about the kinds of questions that students missed with respect to pieces of the content and overall depth of knowledge. And then we're here to support you. Our Pearson team, we've got instructional supports on the platform, and then our implementation team will guide your implementation and provide additional professional development as needed. So let me pause there. And while I'm flipping over to the platform, if you have any questions while we're going along, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Alicia is going to help me monitor questions that we do have, and I'm happy to pause and answer those as we go. So I'm logged in as a 6th grade math teacher, and I'm going to scroll down. You can see she's got 3 classes rostered here, and I'm going to click on roster by standard. This report is probably the primary report that a teacher uses with Navvy. What you're seeing is you got your students in the rows and your standards in the column. And so the default is to show you just the columns that correspond to standards that at least one student has taken an assessment on. But I can flip this back and show you that we have a column for each standard in 6th grade math. So all 29 standards are represented by the columns here. And you can even from this screen imagine, although if some of you guys are teachers, you know this intimately, but a lot of teachers have 5 classes, maybe 25 students in a roster and 29 standards. So keeping track of who's learned what is an enormous task. And we built Navvy to help teachers with that. And so I'm going to flip it back and just show you the columns where we have data for students. And so here, the checks correspond to communicating that a student has taken an assessment in Navvy and received a diagnosis of competency. So check is competency. And an X corresponds to a child has taken an assessment and they got a diagnosis of non-competency or in progress. They're still working on that standard. The colors of the X correspond to which attempt the child is on. So in Navvy, every student has 3 opportunities to demonstrate that they have learned the standard. The blue X corresponds to attempt 1. So Kobe has taken a Navvy assessment. We call them competency checks. Kobe has taken a competency check on expressions and equations 2 and reached and got non-competency. Lorenzo, the yellow X means that he's taken expressions and equations 1 twice and got non-competency on both attempts. And then the red is our 3rd, and in Navvy, their final attempt to show competency of the standard. When we talk about actionable data in Navvy, The primary action to take from this report, if you sort the columns, then first we'll sort it this way and celebrate that we have 70% of our class who's learned expressions and equations 8. And then you can sort it the other way and see that Neve, Piper, and Trevor, that is my meaningful group for differentiated instruction. If you sort by different columns, you can see the power of Navvy is in the multi-dimensional nature of the assessment. And so we're not just measuring math as one thing or one dimension. We're measuring the knowledge of expressions and equations 8 as one thing, and the knowledge of geometry 4 is another thing. And so you can get profiles for students that delineate what students know and what they don't know. So if I sort by different standards, you'll see I have different groups of students that need help on those different standards. If I look across a row, then I can see, get information to drive personalized instruction for an individual student. So if we took a look at Piper's profile, the 60% here means that she's learned 60% of the standards that she's been assessed on so far in the school year. So she's learned 1, 2, 3 out of the 5 shown here. So she needs help in expressions and equations 8 and NS1. Another thing you'll see with Navvy that's different compared to interim assessments and summative assessments is you can have the same overall amount of learning, and it will show you that you need help on really different standards. And so Piper has learned 60% of the standards. And if we go down to Kobe, she's also learned 60% of the standards, but she needs help on expressions and equations 2 and G4, where Piper needs help on EE8 and NS1. And so same overall amount of learning, totally different individual needs to accelerate their learning. So that's the primary action that teachers are going to take from this data. From there, teachers can drill in and learn more about the assessment results. I'm going to click on Trevor's blue X. And what you're seeing here, minus the left-hand menu under Monique's column, is the same thing that Trevor saw when he submitted the assessment. So when he submitted the assessment, this result popped up in just a second or two. And so one of the things that we want to build in Navvy is student ownership or agency of learning. So as soon as Trevor submits, he gets to review these results, and we want him to notice patterns from this report that I'm showing you here based on the types of questions he answered correctly and incorrectly. So what this chart is showing, the table is showing you, is that there were 3 components to this standard. So at the top, we have the overall standard, and we've broken each standard down into parts that we call components. And so it's telling you how many questions on the assessment measured each component and how many questions on the assessment measured were at each level of cognitive complexity. So DOK 1, 2, or 3. So we can see that each icon in the report represents 1 question on the assessment. Plus means you answered the question correctly. Minus means you missed the question. And so here we have component 1. Trevor answered all 3 questions correctly, missed both questions for component 2 and component 3. And so if he's looking for patterns, he can see things like, oh, I got both of the DOK 1 questions right, and then missed both of the DOK 3 questions. And then you can see our note here to Trevor. We don't use the X's to represent in progress or non-competency on student dashboards. We use in progress dots. So Trevor hasn't learned EE8 ... yet to be consistent with a growth mindset. So this is showing you kind of our assessment blueprint on the back end. It's showing you the spread of questions. And part of the Navvy design is the careful nature of building that blueprint and generating a form for attempt 1, attempt 2, and attempt 3, and making sure that the breadth and depth of the standard, the rigor and the content is represented on each form. And the meaning of competency stays the same across the forms, even though the items are changing. So I could summarize my career for you guys by saying it is building a technique, a psychometric technique that will generate this check in X in a way where you can trust the data, in a way that we have a lot of validity and reliability evidence that the student really does need help on the standard if Navvy is generating that X. And they really do have a good handle on the standard if they're getting that check. And so what's different about Navvy is to have this detailed classroom result, the check and the X, but also have all the validity and reliability that we usually just reserve for summative testing. And so we're keeping the assessment short, but giving that validity and reliability. Any questions so far?
Nothing from chat yet.
Okay. So everything I've talked about so far, we call competency checks in Navvy. And on this screen, before I show you a little bit more about competency checks, I did want to note that we have practice questions and assessments in Navvy. Those are called quick checks. So if I click quick check results, then I'm going to see a similar view with my students by my standards, but these are showing me the results of practice questions. And so I could click on any of these practice questions results and see more specific information about the kinds of questions that students are answering correctly and incorrectly on the practice assessment. So if I click this time on Trevor's red minus for EE8, then I get a similar result that I can see the kind of questions he missed on the practice. But now I can review these questions and take a look at what was, if I'm Trevor, I can say, what was my answer and what was the correct answer? And the teacher too can see the type of response that Trevor is given when he's missing those items. So if I go back here, I said I was going to show you that, but I want to show you one other thing before I go ahead. At the classroom level, if you click on this little data link for any of the standards, then you also get class level summaries, and you can see things like, overall, which component of the standard did my class have the hardest time with? And so these bars represent the average percent correct for a given component across the class. And so where we see the lowest percent correct, component 2 was the hardest component for this class. And so you can compare an individual class to all of the classes you teach. I'm going to go back, and so far I've just clicked on roster by standard. I'm going to click on standards. And so in Navvy, we give you all of our blueprints from the very beginning of logging in. So on the first day of school, we have for each row here a standard. And in this column, we will define the components, how Navvy has broken those standards down into parts. And then we have the number of items or the number of questions that we're going to pull in a given form for each component. So the form of 6 to 8 items is going to have 3 to 5 questions about component 1 and 3 to 5 questions about component 2. Sometimes it's even across components like EE1. Sometimes it's the components are differentially weighted, like expressions and equations 3. It really just depends on how those components are defined and whether they're at the heart of the standard or if they should be less emphasized. And so then we'll give you the number of DOK 1, 2, and 3 questions that we're going to pull on the form. And so some of our educators will do part of their PLCs. They'll even look at the blueprints and some sample questions about a given standard before they teach the standard to get an idea of what does a DOK 3 question look like for this standard. I'm going to show you what one view that a teacher can see, and that is to demo the assessment like a child sees it. That's what I'm showing you here, just so that you can see what the platform looks like when a child takes an assessment. And so today we have multiple choice and multiple select questions. For next school year, we are adding technology enhanced items. But this would be the student experience where they click finish, and then it's going to let them know if they left any questions blank. And then in real time, that's going to pop up for the students to review their responses, and it gives them that DOK by component breakdown. I'm going to click on class roster now, and I want to show you what a student dashboard looks like. So I'm going to go down to Trevor that we keep coming back to and click on view progress. And in Navvy, students are on a mission to collect a micro-credential or a digital badge for each standard they've learned. And so we're going to represent that by a green happy check and this credentialing ribbon, the Navvy credential at the bottom of the check. So that means they've taken the assessment and earned their micro-credential for the standard. And that corresponds to earning competency, that green check on the teacher report I showed you. So this page is what a child sees when they would log in. The teacher can just always get to that view as well. And then you can see the child has their in progress dots, and they can click on that report at any badge, the in progress, at any time and go back and review their results for that assessment. The number of dots on the in progress badge for the students fills in as the students complete attempts. So that one blue dot filled in means that Trevor has taken that assessment one time in Navvy. If he took another competency check, then a second blue dot would fill in for Trevor. We're also tracking results across the school year. So I flipped over to another tab to show you a student that had data across 4 school years. And so this would be a child that's in 6th grade today. Irma's in 6th grade, but they use Navvy in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and then this year. And so what the learning map lets a child do and the teacher do is, a lot COVID brought to bear to the forefront of conversations, unfinished learning or learning gaps. That's something that we're pinpointing in Navvy in real time. And so when COVID happened with districts who were using Navvy, they just went back and looked at their last year's results and they could see the standards that a student hadn't been assessed on, or the blue and progress dots had been assessed on but hadn't yet learned. What the learning map, it's interactive. And so if we take a standard that Irma hasn't learned yet, like EE2, if we click on the map for that standard, then it's going to show me the prior standards or prerequisite standards with the blue square. And it's going to show me the next steps for that follow learning after that standard with the purple diamond. And so I can always see, okay, if Irma's struggling with EE2, what standards did she not learn that are prerequisite? And I can assign practice questions on prior grade standards for homework or class activity, or do it with the whole class as a discussion to go back and address those unfinished learning pieces. Okay, I'm going to flip back over to the first view I was showing you with Monique and her classes. And so I clicked on roster by standard, and we talked about that. I clicked on standards. One of the things I'll note under standards is for each standard, we've aligned and created teaching materials for that specific standard, a small number of teaching materials that are highly curated to answer kind of the what next question. And so one of the things in building Navvy, this is our 6th school year, is, teachers would say, okay, thank you, Laine. Now I know who knows which standard and who doesn't. But what do I do? Like, what should I do differently in my differentiated instruction or my personalized instruction? And so these are 3 examples of activities that really hone in on targeted instruction for that standard that are accessible through the platform. And then let me show you how to assign. And so in Navvy, we said all the assessments are short, 6 to 8 questions. And so if you click on assign number 1, that's going to let you assign attempt number 1 for a standard or more standards to your whole class. And so typically the use cases, as students are logging into their computers, Miss Miller would click on this box if she wants to assign EE4 to her class, and it's going to default to the current time in an hour from now. For your time zone, I am on the coast of Georgia, and so on Eastern time, and she just clicks submit. And so now that assessment is open for all the children in her class. If she also wanted to assess 2 standards at the same class period, then she would just open up for a second standard. And so similarly, when she gets ready to give attempt 2, Navvy is keeping track of who's learned which standard. And if she opens up one of these assessments for the whole class, it's really just going to open up for any child who is still eligible to show competency, or any child who's taken attempt 1 and shown non-competency. And so teachers, you are the ones who are pacing the Navvy assessments based on the needs of your class or your individual students. You can assign also to individual students. Let me pause right there and see if we have any questions.
Let's see. We do have a question here.
Okay.
How are the DOK 1 through 3 questions distributed across the standards or for each standard?
Yeah, great question. So our team of educators and assessment specialists who built the Navvy assessments also built the blueprints. And so if I click on standards, they really the components are defined by Navvy as well. But if you look at the language, we're using language of the standards. And once we break them down, we just evaluated, sometimes we built the components to be even, but we just use content expertise, educators, to determine that this component should have more weight or more prominence, is more what the standard's about than this component. And so it was simply content expertise. Great question.
Great. And we do have another one here. How does Navvy fit into lesson planning? And is it suitable for both regular instruction and intervention?
Yeah, great question. So the primary way that teachers use Navvy is kind of how I described in the formative assessment process. So after primary instruction has been provided and you're ready to see who's learned the standard, then you're ready for Navvy assessment. And so you're going to have even more micro formative assessments that are happening along the way, your tickets out of the door. And when you get ready for students to show that they've learned the standard, then you would use your first Navvy assessment. And then from there, that's going to identify who still needs help. And then Navvy comes back into play after that additional instructional support's been provided, and you're ready again for the child to demonstrate competency of the standard. So it syncs really well with the competency-based education framework, where we're trying to get all students to meet the high expectations of the standards, but we're letting them do it at their own pace and providing those instructional supports as needed between the assessment attempts. Other questions?
All right, we do have another one that just came in.
Okay.
Can items be aligned to multiple standard sets? For example, Common Core plus a state or local standard.
We will do alignment for your given state. And so like right now, the states that are using like, our Georgia districts have Georgia standards. So we've done that alignment work. And so as you reach back out to us, we can tell you where we are in your state's alignment and what the timeline would be to finish out any of that alignment. Other questions?
That's all we have for right now. Thanks.
Okay, those are great ones. We have just a couple minutes, and so I'm just going to give you this overview. If we have any math coaches or English coaches or instructional coaches on the call, this is a view that will let you see aggregate data across all of your standards. And so I'll show you one use case for this kind of data. I filtered the data to show me a row for every standard, where at least 25% of students in my district, or maybe your school, if you're a school administrator, have taken an Navvy assessment. So I can sort the columns by this column, which means competency out of the students who've attempted the assessment. And first, we're going to celebrate because we have 94% of our students have learned NBT4. But if you sort it the other way, like you can identify your highest leverage standard in terms of professional learning and support. And so for NF1, for this district, if I'm a math coach, like this is my highest need across the district to support teachers in that kind of what's next question for an activity or personalized support they could provide for students. And so it directs math coaches and instructional coaches next steps as well, because they can see where to provide support in those professional learning communities. And so from there, you could sort and look, and this is across all teachers and all schools, but you could also get a school level breakdown for all of the data too.